The media versus Eddie Howe. The fans, or some of the fans, versus Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe in or Eddie Howe out? Has he met the limits of his own powers? Is it time for a new manager? Or have Newcastle failed him? Now that Newcastle on the low point, what's going on for Eddie Howe? What is happening at this present time? How are we going to move forward? Let's find out right here on Toon Tactics TV, folks.
Oh, brilliant from Sham. And now Murphy could take on the shot. Fabian Sham
All right, folks. Always an incredible blessing to be here with you today on a Wednesday, not on a Tuesday. I've had to, change things around as always for international break, but always a blessing to be here. Really, really excited about tonight's show. I've got tons and tons of slides. I'm not going to be able to, I realized in the 2 hours, really, I'm not going to do go through each slide and every individual point, but I wanted to comprehensively get through and explain, get through together with you guys as to like what's happening with Eddie Howe, with Newcastle, um, why are we where we are, and is there a sunny side on the horizon, or is there no sunny side? Are we just doomed and destined for failure, essentially? And I'm going to give you guys my thoughts towards as we're going through it as well, because I was just still sort of working my way out, even in the process of putting all of this together. So just to let you know, guys, we're going to talk about what the media is saying. We're going to talk about the various solutions. And look, my camera's off again. We're talking about the various solutions that are being offered to Eddie Howe, what he needs to do to turn Newcastle's fortunes around and everything else like that. And we're going to talk about in terms of, is it the tactics? Is it the players? Is it Eddie Howe? What is it exactly that's happening for Newcastle going forward? And yeah, and I think I've frozen. Have I frozen, guys? Let me know. I feel like I've frozen. No, here we go. I'm back. So yeah, like tons and tons of stuff to talk about. I haven't even mentioned it all today, but I'm going to need you guys to uh, always with your views, with your comments, you add the substance to the show, you add the nuance to the show with all of your ideas and everything else, and let's do it. Let's get this on. And as always, folks, incredible already. Even before the show started, I saw people in the chat. Always blessing to see you guys, and God bless you all. And guys, do let me know where you guys are listening from. It's always good to know. I know we've got international fans, Newcastle fans watching, and rival fans actually watching from Florida, South Africa. We've had folks here as well. So do let us know where you guys are listening from. Toon on tour. Good to see you. God bless you. Sounding just like Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea, and Spurs fans. Let me know what you mean. Like I feel like I've started. I've just came in. You know when you hear a conversation mid sentence. Let me know what you mean by that. Tune on tour, and so I can get in on the conversation. BT says, "Good evening, Philip, and all those in the chat. Always a blessing to see you, BT. God bless you, and welcome as always, Aaron. Good to see you, sir. God bless you. Good evening, Philip, and all. Good evening. Good to see you, Aaron. All right, so." We've got Mr. Eddie Howe. He's in handcuffs. He's been questioned by the media. All this and that. What's going on? Well, let's start off with the problem before we get into anything else. What the problem is for fans and for the media and everybody else alike. Newcastle are in 14th place at the moment, and after 11 games, they've won 3 games, they've drawn 3 games, and they've lost 5 games. They've scored 11 goals and conceded 13 with a minus, conceded 14 with a -3 goal difference. They've lost their last 2 games, both away to Brentford and to West Ham, both 3-1 losses. And so those are heavy defeats now going into the international break itself. So let's start off with that, with the problem. That's just one of the problems, right? But that's like the main problem, or for this show anyway, for the purpose of the show, that's the crux of the situation of what we're talking about. I'm going to talk add a little bit briefly about what the media are saying. Obviously, this ties into what we're talking about. I couldn't show the Sky News one with Mr. Carragher, and I forgot that the gentleman's name, the presenter there. Because whenever I show Sky stuff or TNT Sports stuff, I get banned, I get copyright this, strike that, and I just can't bother to do that right now. So I'm going to have to paraphrase some of what Mr. Carragher has said on this show before I go on to speak to, kind of listen to what Mr. Simon Jordan and Mr. White have said, and Mr. Kieran as well, but mainly what Mr. Jordan has said. And just to start off with Mr. Carragher, I don't know if you guys watched this, obviously, and it was towards the end of the show, obviously, they talked about Newcastle home and away, and Mr. Carragher's kind of final conclusion was that he's done all he can, Eddie Howe, and the club have failed him, essentially. So what he meant by he's done all he can, he said that Newcastle aren't going to win the Premier League. His version was, okay, Newcastle have won a cup now, they've been to Europe, they're not going to win the Premier League, and that's it. He's done all he can. And they're not, and he's been let down, he's not going to go any further. My initial thoughts to that was, my initial first response to that was, and I'd love to hear what you guys are saying. That's a BT, Jim White. Thank you. That Jim White from Talksport was, is Carragher being a bit snobbish? Oh, it's Newcastle. I mean, they've been in the Champions League now and they've won a cup. They should be happy, and that's all he can do. Like, he might as well move on and go to England. Just go to his next career stop. Newcastle aren't going to go any further than that. But personally, I think, and probably this is the fan in me, is that can't be the depths of your analysis, because it's not what he's done all he can. We have more in this club, much more. We're in a fantastic financial headroom with PSR at the moment, after the sale of Isak, as well as Lloyd Kelly, as well as all the other sales that were made. Despite the transfers we made, we've done a show about this as well. We've talked about it. Newcastle can spend, if they want, up to 250 million. And they can spend between 100 and 150 million sustainably, with 20 to 30 million sales going forward for every transfer window. So we're in a fantastic financial position to be able to grow. So it's not that Eddie Howe has done all he can. There's more to that both Eddie Howe and Newcastle can do in terms of going forward. And I think Mr. Carragher is a bit too, what's the word I want to think? I think he's being strategic in his thinking. And there's a little bit being tactical and conniving. He wants to see Liverpool at the top. He wants to see the elites continue to be the elites, like many fans of the elite clubs want their clubs to be. And they have temporarily been worried by the likes of Newcastle and Aston Villa especially, that they'll be knocked out of those positions by those clubs. And I think, seeing Newcastle in this down period, they want to continue to pile on the pressure. That's my perspective. You guys let me know what you guys are thinking as well. BT says the only people that have let Eddie down are the players, and we're going to talk about that, because I think there's definitely multiple factors as to the reason why Newcastle are where they are at the moment. So that was my perspective on Mr. Carragher and what he was saying there. I didn't really take it. When I say didn't take it, I took it seriously as to obviously what he's saying and explaining it, but I just didn't take it seriously from a position where I thought, there's some truth in this. I think this could really change things up. But what I did take a little bit more seriously, and in substance and in perception and kind of and review of, and I need to get my my timings on this, is this Talksport conversation between Mr. Jim White, as BT has let me know, Simon Jordan and Martin Keown. I'm going to focus on what Mr. Simon Jordan has said. So I'm going to put the video up, because Talksport, God bless them, I know that they get a lot of stick from people sometimes, but whenever I've shared content from Talksport on my channel, I've never ever got a strike. So God bless them for that. And at least they're open to have to kind of people talking about the material and what they're saying. So let me see that. So yeah, let me break it down a little bit. I thought it was quite interesting because I thought it was a bit more. Make sure you guys can see that. Yeah, you can. I thought it was a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more, had a little bit more substance to it, and had a little bit more conversation to it. So let me make sure you guys can see that. Yes, you can. So I'm gonna start. There's two little parts I wanted to show and discuss it with you guys. Now they do talk about Newcastle
Elanga, how little
extensively, and they kind of mainly want to focus in on. I forget which part kind of we're heading to now, and I'll explain it. But they do kind of hone in on Newcastle's away form and why it's been so bad and what's been going on. So let's take it away.
they've been used, really. They're just on the periphery of the team. It doesn't feel like the squad is strong enough. Obviously, they've got Voltamada.
Oh, that's the wrong part. let me get that here. Here we go.
3 goals away from home. Only Wolves have scored fewer on the road.
I hear the but let's not turn it into a crisis because they've just won the EFL game against Spurs, so they're in the quarterfinals of the EFL of the League Cup.
I just wanted to pause there. Let's not turn it into a crisis. I don't know about you guys, and maybe it's a fan. It will be a fan thing, right? I feel like everybody is turning it. Well, not everybody. A lot of people are turning it into a crisis. There was some other. If I had time, I would have shown some other videos. I do feel like there is an overreaction. There's no. I'll tell you what. There's definitely an overreaction from me when I'm watching Newcastle games. Right? I'm emotional about it. I'm attached. So typically, when I prefer to give my match reviews after I've cooled down and able to talk about it. So it's good to hear and to listen to somebody who's not a Newcastle fan, right? And to add to it as well is Simon Jordan had a certain perception of Eddie Howe, which is, he's a stepping stone manager for Newcastle before they get to the next guy. He didn't really take him as seriously as a manager that could be elite. But as you guys know, he had an interview with Eddie Howe. And a return from that interview, I'm not saying now Simon Jordan thinks that Eddie Howe is going to be Pep Guardiola. But I feel like his ratings have at least a little bit gone up for Eddie Howe in this as well. So the thing is, I wanted to focus on that. Let's not turn this into a crisis.
Into a crisis because they've just won the EFL game against Spurs, so they're in the quarterfinals of the EFL of the League Cup, the one they're defending. They're going reasonably well in the Champions League. They've got to get themselves together in the Premier League, and I'm pretty sure that they will. I made the observation last week that they've got a new.
He's pretty sure that Newcastle will get themselves together when it comes to the Premier League. He's noted they're doing well in the League Cup. They're defending it well. Where obviously we're now in the quarterfinals, facing Fulham at home, with every chance to get to the semi-finals. We're 6th place currently in the Champions League with 9 points. And he's focused in on where we're struggling, which is the Premier League at the moment, specifically the away games, right? And in a nutshell, that's what it is.
I made the observation last week that they've got a new centre forward in there. Isak's gone, so they're setting up a different way now. The two wingers have got to start contributing a little bit more. Lo and behold, Harvey Barnes comes into the team and scores a great goal on the weekend. But it's the moment they seem to get adversity away from home, i.e. they get pegged back or they go behind, that what Eddie was saying. I think Eddie does a press conference in a really good way because he is critical, but he's not disparaging. But he isn't individualising the criticism. He's talking about the nature of the way that the team performs. So I think he'll see.
And I'm going to...
through this.
So I think he'll see his way through this, which is generally the point of view that I have. Spoiler alert. And it's interesting that he's talked about the players. He's talked about where things are. I'm going to bookmark the thing on the players and what my views are on them a little bit later on because I think this all ties in terms of and how he talks about how Simon Jordan talks about the press conferences and how Eddie Howe he likes the way that Eddie Howe kind of still gives genuine and honest responses about how the team's doing without kind of essentially throwing anybody under the bus. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm going to bookmark that because it's going to feed back into our later conversations about and my own observations about where Newcastle are at and why Eddie Howe has a certain perspective and how he is in the media. So I want to know what you guys think about it so far. Are you as what's the word? Do you agree with Simon Jordan here, or do you think there's things he's missing out here? There's a second point I wanted to cover that Simon Jordan talked about as well. I'm going to fast forward it a little bit and get you guys' perspective on it as well. But so far, I'm with the more kind of objective thinking in terms of Eddie Howe and Newcastle at the moment. So let's see what you guys are saying. This is the second point that Simon Jordan makes here.
We're really giving a good.
But there's no issue with their home form. They're getting good results. They got beat by Arsenal when Arsenal scored 2 late goals.
Screwing the road.
But that didn't happen last
They
year.
didn't score early in the season. They got 3 0-0 draws in quick succession against Leeds, Bournemouth, and Aston Villa, right? And that was perhaps because they were adjusting to a new style. The main issue is, why are they setting up differently away from home and causing themselves problems?
Yeah.
I would
So they're focused in on the problem. Why are Newcastle United setting up differently when they're away from home?
suspect that the crowd at St James's Park play a massive part in demanding Newcastle set up differently and play in a certain way. And Eddie's got to square the circle in his mind and the players' minds that away results have got to be achieved.
Yeah. Well, the next game.
So he's kind of pointing it back to a mentality issue in terms of how Newcastle away are performing away from home. How Newcastle perform at home has got to be the same way they perform away. I think that's part of the issue. I like the observation that he's made and the kind of he's honed in what he thinks maybe the out of all the complex issues and problems there are, what he thinks the kind of the main issue is. I think that's part of it. But as we talk and go through the show a little bit more, I do think there's a slightly wider, more objective way of mentality plays into that. But I don't think mentality is the big thing about that as well. So for Sergeant, the key points to take away from Simon Jordan and his thoughts on it is that, okay, they're not in a crisis. They're doing well in the League Cup. They're doing well in the Champions League. They're just not doing well in the Premier League, specifically away from home, right? He's got to square those pegs in those round holes and find out and kind of get to the point of why that is happening. That was Simon Jordan's takeaway. For me, I think I agree with the way he's processed and he's analyzed that. I would add to what he's saying is that I think the mentality away from home is one cog in the reason of many cogs as to why there is maybe this kind of issue around Newcastle's consistency, especially away from home. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So overall, I think, everyone has their biases. I feel like Carragher's had a very kind of a bias-driven agenda, whereas Simon Jordan and TalkSport in particular, I didn't get to hear the other conversations, were far more comprehensive and objective in their analysis, I think, and something that I could use as substance in kind of going forward. I know there's a whole lot of other media takes we can talk about as well that are a bit more ruthless on Newcastle, but I've got so many other things I want to get through. I want to get you guys' perspective. I want to know what you guys think so far as well. And guys, do remember to like, share, and subscribe as always. Right. So speaking of other things and tons of other things to talk about is also from the perspective of some of my favorite analysts, especially they're not just Newcastle analysts, they cover other teams as well. But I wanted to be able to talk about this I wanted to talk about this in terms of Newcastle from a tactical point of view. And I've used two of my favorite analysts in A Game of Two Halves and Antonio Mango themselves. I want to be able to kind of, because there's also running themes or overlapping themes between both of their analysis of where Newcastle are at in terms of actual Newcastle from a tactical point of view and what's happening on the pitch, essentially, right? And because that plays into my own observations and what we're going to use a little bit later to kind of analyze why Eddie Howe is still persisting with what he's doing at the moment. So the criticisms are, and then A Game of Two Halves has noted it, but I think some of it again overlaps with what Antonio Mango was saying is squad trust and rotation. So, for instance, why persist with Dan Burn at left back? Why persist with Joe Linton, who's underperforming? Why not play Jacob Ramsey, for an example? Those type of issues as well. Obviously, away from home, there's issues around there. We've spoken about that. There's talking about in TalkSport and other areas. Managing Europe, Newcastle, is Eddie Howe managing the squad properly? Whilst this is only his second season in the Champions League, and he's having to manage that. Is he he's struggling with that? Having one game, that extra game takes away 2 training sessions that I've heard. So is he struggling to get his ideas across to the players, and hence why they're suffering a little bit as well? I slightly disagree with that point. No, I do disagree with that point, because in the main, Newcastle, after their Champions League campaigns, have been doing relatively well in terms of results. Like, I think after 4 games in the Champions League, they've won 2, drawn 1, and lost 1 type of thing. So it's not overly bad. I don't think that's the main issue. Attacking style and evolution. That's the part. I think that's the part that I'm really going to address in terms of Newcastle's development and Newcastle style. And some of the overlapping things that both Mr. Mango and a game of 2 halves have been talking about is Newcastle playing too deep. So from they kind of noted where Newcastle's line was. You can see this grey point there. Let me just see if I can hone in on it a little bit more. Can I hone in on it? It's going to be a bit difficult. You see that where it says playing too deep. Newcastle used to play 40 meters up, something like that. And over time, it's gone back to 30, 25, something like that. You can see it right in the bottom right corner. So where Newcastle's defensive line is. So as a result of playing so deep, when they do get the ball, for instance, they're having to cover a lot more ground and get through a lot more players in order to get to the goal itself. Hence why Newcastle's chance creations have been down so much. So that's one of the criticisms, which is a fair criticism as well. I don't necessarily think that's part of Newcastle's attacking style, and I'm going to break that down a little bit going forward. I do think that's an outcome of what Eddie Howe is trying to achieve, but I don't think that's necessarily Newcastle's that's how they want to play. Other conversations around obviously not getting the best out of Voltemada, especially in the recent games, because and we've talked about it before, where there's players, in order to get the best out of Voltemada in his profile, he hasn't got that burst of pace, but he's got that incredible ability on the ball. You need to have players around him. You need to have runners around him, and we just haven't seen that enough at this moment in time. And when we do see it, and you've got this corner here about poor attack, Newcastle's technical ability, especially in the center of the pitch, but also in the final third, in the position half, has been relatively poor as well. And I think that's part of the player issue. That's where the players themselves need to improve as well. So some good tactical analysis there from those guys, and that actually again feeds into the overall kind of view of Newcastle, of Eddie Howe's kind of tactical evolution of Newcastle and where they're at the moment. So is it an Eddie Howe tactical thing, or is it a player thing? Is it a bit of both? What's going on? That's what I'm hoping to answer a little bit later on in the show as well. So let me know what you guys are thinking. Let me know where you guys are at as well. And you know what? I didn't even get to see the chat on my screen doesn't work, but I can see the chat when I come off the screen. So apologies, guys, if I've missed some. I'm just going to go to the chats right now as well. So I'm going to use this going forward in terms of, like I said, to kind of feed into what we're going to talk about a little bit later on in terms of Newcastle's tactical analysis, as well as player analysis, and kind of see where Newcastle, what Eddie's trying to do. I want to know what Eddie's intention is, and essentially why has it not been executed, and what needs to kind of who's on what is to how we're going to push forward. What's going to be the solutions going forward? Let me get some water before I read the chat. Right. So Aaron says, I do think we are having an identity crisis, same as 2 years ago. We can't press because of the fixture congestion. That's true. And risk of injuries. That's really good analysis there, Aaron. And we don't have the players from our recruitment to sustain. Really, really observant. I'm going to be actually talking about that, Aaron, in a lot more depth as well. So do hang on to that point as well a little bit later into the show. Is my camera, I think my camera is freezing over. So let me see what's going on before I, let me get my, just in case. I feel like my camera was freezing over. Let me know if you guys can still hear me and everything else. Because I heard a little bit of like blink, blink. So I hope you guys can still hear me. All right. So Aaron says, all right, here we go. Aaron says, possession. Oh, to sustain possession. Elanga, Ramsey, all counter-attacking players who thrive in space. Yes, I think our recruitment and the manager's decision-making has cost us so far. So recruitment and the manager's decisions are what Aaron feels are like the core issues of why Newcastle are struggling at the moment as well. So I'm going to bookmark that. I am going to discuss that a little bit more further as well, but because I'm going to go back to those points as well. But good. Thank you for the for that, Aaron, as well. So I'm going to briefly discuss the solutions now, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more often because they're going to be a bit. Again, I keep on saying it's going to be later, but it's all coming together. Some of this, and this is going to be a big part of the solutions. The players coming back, right? Especially after the break in late November. Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall is already back. He's already in the team, so I expect him to start, especially with a Burn being suspended. And Wissa due back as well. So that's going to be a big, those players are going to be a big part of how we're playing, and it's going to change in terms of how we intend to play. That's the main news. It's going to be the main conversations around that. And my initial thoughts were, fine, it would be great to have them back, and the team hopefully will get better and improve. But then why are we still pursuing? Why is Eddie Howe still pushing the team to play in the way they're playing at the moment? So keep that thought in your mind as well, because that's going to be that was the kind of the thought that's been rattling in my mind for a little while. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more context as well going forward. NUFC Truth, God bless you. Good to see. Well, I don't know. I think it's my first time seeing you, NUFC Truth. So welcome to. If you've been here before, my apologies, but otherwise, welcome to the show, and God bless you. And NUFC Truth says, if Howe was the man, why can't he manage his team results? How he dropped off injuries in 3 players out of 23, dropping, lying to yourself. I didn't fully catch everything you're saying, the NUFC Truth. Can you rewrite that? Are you saying I'm lying to myself because the results have dropped off and I'm kind of using the players coming back as an excuse? Or just do let me know. I don't want to like answer and say something that you're not actually saying. So yeah, do let me know. But it could be like, it's part of being a fan as well. Is like, you want to see. Look, I predicted Newcastle was going to beat Brentford 2-1. I did it hesitantly, but look, that's what happens, man. That's what happens when you're a fan. All right, so I'm gonna go through these next datas and points about Newcastle relatively quickly because they're all gonna kind of make up my overall conversation about what I think Newcastle, what Eddie Howe is trying to do. I put all these data points together to kind of talk about, because I'm thinking, what is Eddie Howe trying to do? What is his intent? I'm going to focus on Eddie Howe's intent, tactical intent with Newcastle. And UFC True says, if Howe was the man, why can't he manage his team? Oh, I read that one. And he says, because every manager is bad on results. Ten Hag was sacked after 2 trophies. He was, and I think, but comparing Newcastle to Man United is a bit like apples and oranges, like different history, different context. The whole Glazer situation, Man United being literally a global team, a global club, everything surrounding that as to why Ten Hag was sacked in the first place. Where their fans are at with Man United is different where Newcastle are at with Newcastle United. So, and it's not just Man United, really. It's like with any other teams. Like, why don't Newcastle sack their managers the way Eddie Howe, the way Chelsea do, or Liverpool do, or and but again, I do think sometimes comparing teams in different areas, especially certain teams, like comparing apples and oranges. Aston Villa, who I think are a lot more closer to us, or closer to each other in terms of where we are evolving as teams, have had Unai Emery for nearly the same amount of time as we've had Eddie Howe. I think they've had Unai Emery for 3.5 years, and they've been through some difficult times together as well. So, and then you'll have other teams who've been sacking managers all the time and just looking for stability. So, I wouldn't use, for me personally, I wouldn't use Man United as an example. Arsenal, for instance, have had Arteta for like 6 years, So why haven't they sacked, Arteta, for instance? But look where he's at and what they're doing. So I think it's difficult. But Arteta came in on the back of when Arsenal doing absolutely atrociously bad, right? Many Arsenal fans would refer that as their banter era. They never want to go back to that. Now it's time for them to win trophies. And where if Arteta doesn't win a trophy this season, there'll be big questions for him. But again, where Arteta is at with Arsenal is different where Ten Hag was with Man United and where Amorim now is with Man United, for instance, right? Amorim has lost more games. I think the percentage of wins is lower than Ten Hag, I think, something along those lines, right? But he hasn't been sacked. So why is that? And I think it's because Man United are in a different place now to when they were in Ten Hag, for instance. So yeah, all right. So data points. I use all these kind of metrics. I'm going to, there's about 6 or 7 of them. I'm going to discuss them in full detail. I'm going to say what they mean, because they're all going to add up to what I think Eddie Howe's tactical intent is of Newcastle so far. And I think really Aaron Kane already kind of hit it on the head in the previous chat. But essentially, look, this is the first one. This is the field tilt versus the PPDA. The field tilt in a really the simplest way of saying it is is the team mainly attacking or is it mainly having to defend? Newcastle are at 50.5%. So it's like really down the middle in terms of attacking and intent. PBDA talks about when they press or how much of a high press they have, high press and higher penetration. And they kind of put those on the x-axis to put where Newcastle are at the moment. And you can see that they're like nearly really kind of in a balanced edge here, not too more towards the high press, high penetration, but not as close, obviously, to Arsenal's, your Chelsea's, your Liverpool's, a little bit behind Nottingham Forest, but a little bit above them in terms of actually the PPDA stats themselves. More closer to a Man City in terms of like being kind of right in the middle of it, really, in between high press, slow press, and kind of also kind of being attacking. And you can see that the Newcastle are more in a low block type of team, low block type of situation as well. So keep that in mind as well as to what the intent is for Eddie Howe. And Aaron talked about it, which is to try and conserve our energies, to try and conserve our players and risk less injuries. We know that Eddie Howe is trying to be more pragmatic, especially with more games that are happening as well. Otherwise, before you would have seen Newcastle right where Arsenal are at when you kind of see those things as well. Good to see you guys in the chat. Speaking of international fans, good to see Matlu all the way from South Africa. God bless you, Matlu. Hello, Phil. Good to see you. And my man, Wobojog. Just as I speak about Arsenal, Wobojog appears as well. I was going to give them high praise. Now I have to rein it back. No, I'm joking. God bless you, Wobojog. Wobojog says, I'm keeping Arteta, even if we don't win anything. You see? And this exactly hits the point of where, you can't, kind of saying, why Man United don't do this? Why don't Newcastle do what Man United do with Ten Hag? Why don't we do what Arteta? It's apples and oranges. And you can already see Arsenal fan talking about, in Wobajog talking about Arteta and where fans are at. So it's so difficult to kind of do that, really. So Wobajog says, I'm keeping Arteta even if we don't win anything. If I can't see improvements in points and other metrics at the end of the season that indicates the team is still in an upward trend from our best season. That's super interesting, Jog. Do you have a threshold though of when you expect to like just like, okay, even if all the metrics say you're hitting the bar and all the metrics you're seeing upward trajectory continuously, but you're not seeing trophies, do you have a threshold, Joe? Do you have like an end of the line where like, okay, enough of these metrics going up? The metric I need to see is trophy metrics. Is that anywhere there? I'm not even applying that you need to see it necessarily. I do think, because I think if you're consistently improving as a team, trophies and accolades will eventually come anyway. It's like just in life, really, isn't it? Aaron says the issue isn't the results, it's the performances. Since the cup final, we regressed so much. There has been no real evolution or good in-game management. So Aaron's more concerned about the performances there. Wobberjog's the same should apply to Howe, in my opinion. Okay, so well, Aaron answered your question there. Let me know, Wobberjog, from an Arsenal perspective. Do you see Newcastle as a team since that win at League Cup? Do you think that we've regressed as an opposition fan? And if there are any other opposition fans, I'd love to hear your views on this. NUFC True says it's about taking away the personnel, just seeing the results. Yes, everyone has their way of seeing it. I think I would be more rounded in my views in terms of, because I remember last year, and I'm going to talk about last year as well, because I got a video of myself, when Newcastle were getting the results in the first 10 or so games, but everybody was worried about the performances because they weren't good, and they knew that they would catch up to us, and they did. So it depends, and it's I personally trying to be as well-rounded as possible. BT says, the narrative around the team's performances and transfers is often critical, suggesting that despite the ownership's wealth, the club is not spending effectively or having a difficulty in making transfers. It's interesting observation there, BT. BT says, some articles are focused on the team's struggles to acquire key players, even linking current players to moves away from the clubs for less than their worth. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think, okay, there's a balance. Some of it is truth, obviously, right? But I think some of it, for me personally, and me reading motive into it, which is difficult, I think media and others they don't believe that Newcastle deserve to have good players, right? We're not an elite club. We're not a global club. What are we doing with your Tenalis and your, previously your Isaks and others? I think, that Isak situation wasn't even necessarily a revelation. I kind of knew this before, especially when I go on rival fan channels. They don't believe that Newcastle deserve to have good players. Even when those players weren't considered to be good players, but Newcastle developed those players and made them into very good players, they said, oh, okay, now it's time for them to move on. Right? So I think that's the underlying thing. All right, so field tilt on PDA. Newcastle low block, being very, very pragmatic when they press, very pragmatic and strategic in their press, but also in terms of and that's kind of borne out in terms of how the amount of time they take to attack, which is very, very much in the middle. Again, average field tilt for each team. Newcastle are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sixth in the Premier League in terms of the amount of time they spend attacking. So behind Arsenal, fair, Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool, and Nottingham Forest. I think this Nottingham Forest one is obviously taking Mr. Ange Postecoglou. I think give it another 10 games under Mr. Deitch. I expect this field tilt to go to the Forest to go to the 11th or 12th place for field tilt metrics. But otherwise, and Newcastle are very much in the upper half of it in terms of average field tilt, in terms of the amount of time they spend attacking and being in the opponent's half, which is an interesting observation as well. So what does that mean? Because our charts creation doesn't reflect that, in my opinion, right? So what does that mean? And we're going to talk about that. This is the PDA, obviously, in terms of the amount of pressure, in terms of turnovers and pressures that Newcastle are doing. And again, we're lower. We're somewhere 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, we're top 8 in terms of that. and we're behind teams that aren't necessarily known for that. Man United as well. So and City, we're very close to City in different areas of PPDA, and City are in Europe as well. So City have been a lot more pragmatic in how they're kind of building up from the back and what they're doing as well. But we are 8th in the league for that, which is very, very, very interesting. All right, so next is league combined weighted goals and XG tiers. So this is measuring Newcastle in terms of, and they always do it a little bit differently. They're saying how many goals in terms of putting Newcastle's actual chances created from expected goals and measuring it with the actual goals they've had. Where are they as a team? So are they like a very good defensive team? Are they a good team just offensively, but bad offensively? Are they average in both those areas? Where are they? And for the folks that can't see, it's very blurry, but Newcastle are smack back, almost smack in the middle. They're a little bit more closer to before the last 3 or 4 games. They're a little bit more closer towards trying to break the line into becoming a good team offensively and defensively. But in the last 3-4 games, they've gone back a bit when they're now considered to be average defensively, but still a good defensive unit, but poor offensively in terms of chance of creations as well. So that's where Newcastle are at in terms of that. So average defensively, but poor or below average offensively so far as well. So I'm going to go to the chat in a moment as well, but that's when Newcastle are at in terms of that. Again, in terms of this is passing directions, where Newcastle mainly attacking, and you can see Newcastle very much and how they attack as well. And you can see Newcastle towards the right-hand side of the screen. So they're more direct and they favor the right-hand side. I would want Newcastle to be more balanced. We know the real reasons, big reason why Newcastle favor the right-hand side, because that's where Trippier and either Murphy and Bruno are, where they want to be avoid, and they don't really want to go to the left-hand side of Burn and the others, where we know is controversial at the moment. Burn, Gordon, and Joe Linton, right? And how we're waiting with bated breath for Mr. Lewis Hall to come back as well. So I think that's a big reason as to why Newcastle are attacking down the right-hand side. But Newcastle is still a very direct attacking team as well, right? And almost are by themselves in that area as well, especially from the right-hand side. And if you're in a position team, you know that's the side that Newcastle are going to try and favor to attack at the moment as well. So that's another interesting metric that we're going to talk about. Here we go. Premier League team success in mid or high block jump press. So let me take away the chat. I see the chat, but take away the line, excuse me, so I can see it. And good to see folks coming in as well. God bless you guys. Please do remember to like, share, and subscribe as well. We're going to go to the chats as well. So Premier League teams success in mid to high blocks jump. So a successful team jump press is when a team recovers the ball within 5 seconds of a team jump press, defined as at least one individual forward pressure during the opposition build-up and progression, right? So how successful are these guys are of winning the ball back within 5 seconds? And you see the line here, the y-axis, I think it is, successful mid-block team jump-up press, right? So Newcastle are pretty high from that mid-block area. And then you've got the y-axis, which is the successful high-block team jump press. And those are the teams like Man City, Brighton, Everton, Sunderland, right? Newcastle would have been 2 years ago now, would have been probably there. Whereas at the moment, you can see that Newcastle are slap back bang in the middle in terms of that mid-block press. And they're very good at that mid-block press. Like they're the best at it, right? Between them, Wolves, Arsenal, Man United, that's what Newcastle are doing very well. And that kind of, again, marries up to the field tilt, which is nearly, between 50 to 55%. Attacking, our strategic press, which is like 8th position at the moment in the PPDA. And this is now with our mid-block press, which is like, again, we are the masters of the mid-block press at the moment, right? And it goes back to what Aaron and others have said in terms of Newcastle being more strategic in their press, more conserving of their energies, trying to ensure that they keep injuries and burnout as minimal as possible with the current areas as well. And that pragmatism, in my opinion, sometimes has led to passivity as well. So there's that mid-block press data as well, adding to all the other stuff we talked about. This other interesting part as well is is also covering the which teams have to deal with low blocks the most in the Premier League, and low blocks, medium blocks, and higher blocks, right? So Newcastle are third in terms of having to deal with low blocks, behind Liverpool, Forest, and right there next to Arsenal and Tottenham, right? So Newcastle at a very, very high rate have to deal with low blocks most of the time, and mid blocks as well themselves. And only 8.6 of the time are themselves having to deal with high blocks themselves, right? So teams are choosing to go in the low blocks against Newcastle. I think that's not necessarily because teams are scared of Newcastle, for instance, as they would be, for instance, of Liverpool, Arsenal, for instance, right? I think it's by design. They want to stop Newcastle players from running in behind, and they know they can hit Newcastle on the transition, especially down the left-hand side or their right-hand side if they're attacking Newcastle, where Dan Burn is. So I think that's a big part of their tactic at the moment as well. But part of it as well is obviously they are worried about Newcastle's runners, but I think they found an effective way, which is the low blocks, to deal with Newcastle's press, in my opinion. So again, it goes back. That's also going to fit into our data, and perhaps why Eddie Howe's. That's part of the reason why I think the results also haven't gone our way, when we haven't been able to deal with that mid block, the low block against teams, but also how to better use our possession when teams are in the low block as well, and how to essentially control games. I think that's been a big part of that. Our passing has been very, very bad. Let me see, say media outlets. I'm going to go to the chat in a moment as well, trying to find where we are. I think I've got one more data to show before I go to the chat. But let me know what you guys are thinking so far. All right, so I am going to talk about Newcastle's intent and everything else in the moment, but what I think Eddie Howe's intent is for the team as well. But let me just quickly see what you guys are saying in the chat. So with all that data, with all that we've discussed as well, I want to be able to talk about what is Eddie Howe doing, what is he trying to do, and is it the right tactic, but also is it being executed by the players themselves? Aaron says, I'm a Newcastle fan and want what's best for Newcastle. Eddie Howe hasn't shown no signs of improving in terms of his in-game management and adapting to his current squad, awarding poor performances. Aaron, it sounds like you're on the edge there. In my opinion, Wobblejog says, in my opinion, Howe problem is managing expectations. Sure, the team is good, but the squad isn't good or big enough for constant Champions League spots. That's why NUFC is yo-yoing between bad UCL season, good off UCL season. Yeah, it's a good observation there. Though I do think our squad depth and quality is better now. But you're right, it's still got a way to go. The fact that we lost 2 first-team fullbacks and are struggling is a sign of that. And to be fair, Wobblejog, obviously, Arsenal, for instance, have taken time, 6 years to build the squad they have now, and we've been up for 4 years now as well. So it's going to take time to get there. Matthew says, honestly, I don't like this style of sitting back and absorbing pressure. It's just not working in our favor. In the Prem, we are a pressing team, but I'm still behind the manager. And that's fair to say. I think I like the observation. I don't like, I don't like this, but I'm gonna back the team. I'm gonna back Eddie Howe to turn things around. That's like, what they call it, critical friend. BT says many supporters feel this perception is unfair, arguing that they are realistic in their expectations and are simply asking for consistency and attacking football. Don't disagree with you, BT. I think the one word I would say is they're simply asking for consistency. A lot of fans are asking for many other fans for their teams are asking for consistency. And if you, apart from Arsenal at the moment and emerging Man City, not many teams are getting that. It's not an easy thing to do. The Premier League is a tough, tough place. Warbojog says, I bet you off UCL metrics are pretty good, which shows me, given the resources at Howe's disposal, he's maximizing its potential. If people are asking for questions, it should be how it should be to Howe's bosses and not him, in my opinion. Well, we've played 4 games. We've scored 1, 5, 8, 10 goals and conceded 1, I think. So yeah, you might be right there, Wilbur. Matt Lou says, has anyone realized how sloppy we are in possession, more especially when the teams are pressing us? Yeah, I have, for sure. Noobadoc says, why do fans think they know better than the professional football manager who has achieved Champions League twice and won a cup? Maybe some do, Noobadoc, but I think, like, from this, and I know it's aiming at me, but from my perspective, I think it's also important for fans to hold managers, players, and owners to account as well. I don't think we should let go of that. Are fans necessarily experts? No, but I think they should still have the opportunity to ask the questions, but also ask amongst themselves. Like, the point of today's show for me was to try as best as I can to get as close to the truth about what's happening with Newcastle, Eddie Howe, and everything, as close to the truth as possible. And it's you guys that are adding the substance, adding the context, and everything else. I've got lots of data and stuff like that. But yeah, we'll see. Robert says, for trophies, in my opinion, are a poor or noisy signal to determine the strength of a team manager, especially if you consider cups. I partly agree with you, Obojog, where poor or noisy signal to determine the strength of a team, especially in the football content world. Sometimes going to rivals channels or kind of discussing these things, not Spurs Kings, for sure not Spurs Kings. I have a lot more in depth, but it does sometimes feel like, but your manager hasn't won anything. Therefore you're rubbish. And I think, no, is this manager better because he won a trophy more recently, type of thing? No, there's a little bit more depth to that. However, I do think winning trophies, and whether it's cups or whether it's the league, does matter, because it shows how a team, how a manager perform under pressure. It's all good performing when you're not under pressure, but how do you perform under pressure? Can you actually bring the tangible results, the tangible in cup form over the line? I do think that matters. I think what matters more is, can you do it consistently? Right? That's going to be the thing as well. So I think that's where I'm a bit, I don't know if it's disagreement, but that's where my balance is. Wobojog says total points versus total expected points, total G versus total XG, etc. are better signal for me to judge a team or a manager. These metrics take external factors out of the equation. For me, example, injuries and ref calls, for instance. Yeah, yes, I can see where you're coming from. I do think to add, you can only, that becomes to wear thin if you're not winning anything. especially over a long period of time. The longer it goes, the thinner that those metrics become, I think. To deal with the low block in football patiently, BT says patiently, the ball side to side to move the opponent's defensive shape. The switch play quickly to find space and exploit it. Yeah, and I don't think Eddie Howe wants to play like that. That's the thing. Adrian Pickett, good to see you. God bless you. Says, as the great Ancelotti said to Lineker, managers need to get used to getting sacked. He says, as Ancelotti, that is true. That is true. Right. So we've talked about, what the media have said, and then we've gone to the data, the various data points to kind of, as a collection, to find out where Newcastle are at. Kind of, it's coming across as a pragmatic team, mid-block team, strategic in our press, suffering with our chance creations despite being direct in our play. We'll put all of that together because we want to know, what is Eddie Howe's actual tactical blueprint? What is his actual intent with the team? Right? Because I wanted to ask that question because I wanted to know, is it being executed by the players? And if not, why not? If it is, why is he persisting with it in both cases? And what does it mean kind of going forward for him, right? So essentially this, I'm going to have to remove the chat as well. What is Eddie Howe's tactical intent? Right, so we know Newcastle's passes per defensive action is around 11. So aggressive. So the intent for Newcastle is to be, so we have a relatively low pass for defensive action, right? So meaning this, so the intent for Newcastle to be aggressive in our high pressing. So the intent is to suffocate the opponents as high up the pitch as possible and force the turnovers. Now, people might not always see that, but some metrics that we talked about do bear that out. There is the intent to do that from Newcastle, right? The passing direction, which is forward 35% of the time, so still very direct. The intent for Newcastle is to be vertical and direct, so essentially just as directly as possible. Prioritize moving the ball quickly and penetrating into the final third. That's the passing intent and direction of Newcastle. Set piece goals, right? And reliable scoring platform to maximize goals from dead ball situations. So if we can't break a team down, set pieces are the next way forward for Newcastle. And field tilt shows Newcastle slightly above average. So we are, let me take this down because I can't see. I'm going to get to the chats in a moment. So the field tilt, the direction of play, just above average, shows that Newcastle do aim to spend the majority of the game attacking the opposition. And that is Newcastle's intent. So Newcastle's, I think Eddie Howe's setup from the metrics that we've read, right? The intent is for Newcastle to be aggressive in the high press, to be vertical and direct, and obviously there is the other stat that showed that we're not, for instance, we're pretty low in terms of winning the ball high, like in the opponent's half. We're very low when it comes to that. We're one of the lowest in the league for that. Yet the PPDA and other metrics show that the intent is to be aggressive in our high pressing. It's more to do where we're being intense. And I think that's in the mid-block areas where we're very much set out at the moment, right? But also to be vertical in our passing and direct in our passing, we spoke about as well. But our chances creation is fairly low as well. So we talk about the technical areas about that. The intent is to also be good with our set pieces and the filter to spend as much time in the opposition half as possible. Where, yes, that is happening, but the chance creations are still low, right? So there is intent. There is intent for Newcastle to still be aggressive, to still be attacking directly, to still create goals from set piece situations, and to still dominate the opponents as well. But there is a performance gap, which we talked about, as to why these things we're not seeing the fruits of these. So yes, we're being direct. Yes, we're trying to dominate territory, but no, we're not creating as many chances. and that's impacting the amount of goals we're scoring as well. And the goals that we are beginning to concede now are impacting our games themselves, and we're not getting those results, right? So where Newcastle struggling, right? We're currently defending too deep, right? So the PBDA is low. The high press is failing to sustain and forcing us to drop into a deep and reactive block rather than a proactive block, right? So the impact is we're inconsistent in our intensity, which leads to long periods of reactive defense when out of possession, right? So I think Eddie Howe wanted to get more control and to be more strategic in the press by setting up in the mid block, because you can't be full throttle all the time. But his intent was to still be proactive in the press and to win it as soon as possible, especially when it gets into the center of the pitch. And a team that's really, really superbly good at that is Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace are a really, really good example of that. It's just not working for Newcastle in that way, where we become reactive rather than proactive. And that's where that leads on to us looking passive in our defending. Current issue, no forward runs and not enough goals. That's my observations. And that's despite us having a high forward pass rate, around 35.2%. So even though we're passing forward, we're not making advanced, players aren't playing in advanced positions. So that leads on to the impact of lack of technical quality. Forward passes are accurate in intent, but lack the final position or a runner, like a whistler, to convert them, resulting in turnovers. And that's when the transitions happen against the team. So the passing intent is there, but the players and technical quality players who are at the end of those passes are not there. And even when they are there, they're not collecting it and taking it on. I saw a video from Antonio Mango today, and it's not the players who you necessarily think of. Like I saw against Brentford, for instance, Tonali getting into advanced position, receiving the ball, and doing a poor pass to Voltemada, who's in a further advanced position, and the attack broke down, and that turned into a turnover for Brentford. It's stuff like that, right? That's out of Eddie Howe's control. And not enough pressure or territory. So even though the field tilt is only 50.5%, some of them have got it into 55%, but fine. It's too low for a high pressing team. So failure to sustain pressure, team wins the ball high, but loses it quickly, allowing the opponents to regain possession and attack us. We talked about that in the Brentford game. So there is a gap, but there's a performance gap in terms of what Eddie Howe wants to be executed on the pitch, which is to be direct, which is to be aggressive, which is to attack whilst being defensively solid, and to have territorial dominion. But the execution is lacking for quality, for runs in behind, that we're defending too deep and too passively as a result of trying to be pragmatic. And we're losing territory because the ball goes quickly up and then goes back into our direction a lot more quicker as well. So we're losing territorial dominion as a result of that. So what does that all mean? What does that all mean for you guys at this moment in time? So the main question I'm gonna ask a little bit later is then, so why is Eddie Howe persistent with this? Right? That's what I wanted to know. Why is Eddie Howe persistent when there is a performance gap between what he wants on the field for his tactics and what the players themselves are able to execute? That was what's, because now we're going to get to the question of Eddie Howe himself, right? A little bit more. We've heard a bit more about the players, and Eddie Howe in parts, but I'm going to focus in on, like, Eddie Howe can see what we can see. He can see even deeper. He has stats. He talks to the players. He's obviously the manager, and he's got other football knowledge around. They know this stuff already. He's won a trophy. He's had 2 Champions League qualifications. He's been in the final twice. So he knows we know Eddie knows what he's doing. So why is he persistent with his current tactical setup? Why is Eddie Howe not changing? So before we get into that, let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. As always, folks, God bless you all. Please do continue to like, share, and subscribe. BT says Eddie Howe's tactical blueprint is built around aggressive, possession-based football in a fluid 4-3-3 formation, characterized by high pressing, real quick transitions, and overloading key zones. That's true, but it's become more of a 4-5-1 out of possession and a 4-2-4 in attack. I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. So he has evolved it a little bit from that. The 4-3-3 was our beloved formation, but that's changed, especially now that we're in Europe a lot more. Aaron says there's lots of different ways of breaking down teams. Wide play, overloads, threading balls through centrally. Yep, there is, absolutely. Are you saying that we're not applying them, or let me know? BT says a key element is the high engagement and intensity from the front, with midfielders and defenders pressing aggressively to win the ball back. Yeah, from a mid-block position. Let me know. Get some water. Right. Aaron says, in terms of breaking down teams, I felt we needed a different profile to Murphy, who can cut inside. And we talked about that right-hand side. Cut inside, combine in tight, combine in tight spaces, or play a killer pass. Elanga is none of those who thrives in transition. And we're being forewarned about this by folks in the beginning, before as well, by rival fans. I think all those things that you described that you want to see in the right winger, Aaron, I think Eddie Howe believes Elanga can do. Let's see if that bears out. Adrian says, considering how supposedly gets into work at dawn and leaves at dusk, is it too much to expect him to have more than one tactical blueprint? That's a fantastic question, Adrian. That actually gets to the crux of what I'm going to talk about in a moment as well. Do hold on to that. Aaron Wobajog says I don't typically read, but I want to, Aaron Wobajog says, Aaron, those new additions need time for fans to see their impact, but I bet your data department already analyzing their performances if they're achieving those target metrics expected of them. Yes, there could be things behind the scenes. All right. So I feel like all you guys are on the same page, as like in terms of not agreeing with everything, but like in terms of what I'm talking about. I'm not saying like I know you guys that wonderful. I was worried when I put all this together. I'm like, I got too many slides, too much information, yada yada yada. But I love how you guys just like are so quality in terms of how you follow and like everything you guys are feeding back. Like I always worried I'm going to get people lost because I think like it's in my head, it's making sense. But anyway, you guys are a blessing. Right. So we've talked about what Eddie Howe wants the team to do, right? And we can see there's a performance gap between what Eddie Howe wants to do and what the team is actually able to perform and do on the pitch. So there's a performance gap, right? So the question now is, why does Howe persist? Right? And like Adrian said, is he works from dusk till dawn. They're at this 24/7 times a week. Is it too much to ask for another tactical setup? That's one of the criticisms you can give, right? And we're going to talk about that in terms of this. I think the main and that all feeds into the question of why does Howe persist in his current tactical setup? That was what was running in my mind, right? So Eddie Howe's system is intentional pragmatism, right? We know he's trying to be strategic in how they press and when they attack. We know he's trying to conserve the energy that Newcastle have. Despite there have been 11 Premier League games that Newcastle have played, they've already played 2 League Cup games and they've played 4 Champions League games. Barcelona, USG, Benfica, and Atletico. So that's 6 games plus 11. So that's 17 games that Newcastle have played in. When did we start? Was it September we started? September, October, November, early November, So 17 games in coming towards 3 months, sometimes playing 3 games in 7-8 days. So we know that Eddie Howe has learned from the past. If you guys remember 2 years ago when we had mountains of injuries, right? 17-year-old Lewis Miley was in our midfield. So Eddie Howe has intentional pragmatism. He wants to be able to manage a squad in Europe, in domestic cups, and in the league itself, right? So he takes up the 4-5-1 block. As I mentioned earlier, that's especially out of possession. That's the key point. He takes the 4-5-1 block. Not the man-to-man press that he was in before, but the 4-5-1 block. The goal is to have structural safety and central protection. So if he's able to defend the central part of the pitch, it's not just Eddie Howe, it's a widespread thing amongst all managers. If you're able to defend the central part of the pitch and force your team out wide and deny them the high quality chances, which for the most part for Newcastle, it was a lot more better 2-3 games ago, but for the most part for Newcastle has been working out. So hence why it goes into that 4-5-1. So it acts as a reliable defensive floor when the aggressive high press fails, which is what we're doing. It allows the team to recover energy and organization. So rather than go for man and use even more energy, if you lose the ball high up, we run back into that 4-5-1 press and we defend as a unit and we force the team out, the opposition out wide. The intentional passivity, and why it's intentional now, I don't think it's just by accident or by performance. That 4-5-1 forces Newcastle to be in a zonal marking system. It isn't a failure to attack the ball, but a strategic pause. So to manage the energy and wait for a clear, low-risk trigger to initiate the next press. So Newcastle lose the ball high up, for instance, and rather go man for man and try to attack everywhere every time. They compact themselves into that 4-5-1 press to prevent any central attacking play, to force the teams to try and attack out wide so they can avoid the high quality chances. They also do essentially zonal marking as well, which looks passive, which ends up looking passive. But the point is to have a low risk trigger, meaning that once the ball either goes to a specific player or a particular part of the pitch, that's when Newcastle press. That's when they come out of that kind of low block, that 4-5-1, and try to win the ball back and hit the team on the counter. That's the idea behind that 4-5-1, and what Eddie Howe behind that 4-5-1, being to conserve the energy, to win the ball back, and to force the opponents to reduce their quality of chances, but also to be able to hit them on the counter. So the core attacking intent, vertically and in transition, we're talking about speaking of attack, the goal is to be direct and rapid and penetrating the opposition. That's why we've got the high forward pass rate of 35%. Shows the non-negotiable instruction to move the ball quickly to exploit the space. And the moment we win it back in that 4-5-1, right, say the ball goes out left or to the right flanks and win it back, the intent is to attack and to be direct in our attacking as quickly as possible, right? The strategic pressing, the system demands players to be selective and strategic in the press to maintain the high intensity standard without burning out, leading to moments where players appear passive. The Brighton goal, the Welbeck goal, where we went into that 4-5-1 and it was played through us. It was meant to be Joe Linton that was meant to step up to Van Heck, but he didn't. Those type of things can be ironed out, I think, the more we play. So the fullbacks as key attackers, and that's the key part. This is a personnel thing, right? The successful version of the system requires the fullbacks, Livramento and Hall, to bomb forward to create a 4-2-4 or a 1-2-5 in attacking shape. We saw that against Forest and Fulham actually as well. Stretching the low blocks Newcastle consistently face, right? So the idea being that we can cause the low blocks and compact team opposition when the low blocks of oppositions and their compactness to expand and have to stretch because our fullbacks are hitting those wings as well. At the moment, we're waiting for those fullbacks to come back, right? So this is what I think is the overall intent and why Eddie Howe is persisting with this system, that it's going to allow him to limit the defensively, to limit the high quality chance of the opponent, to create high quality chances through the direct play and the expansive play of the fullbacks, but also to importantly conserve the energy of his players to reduce injuries and to reduce the likelihood, to reduce the likelihood of injuries and to reduce burnout. That's why he's persisting with it. That's the big part of why he's persisting with it. But there is a continued execution gap and failure in it, right? So the question, this goes maybe more to the question as to, okay, we get why you're doing it, but it's not working and we don't have the players. So why are you persisting with it at the moment? I'm gonna go through this in a moment. I'm gonna go through this and go back to the chats in a moment as well. There is a obviously at the moment, in terms of when you cast right at the moment, there is an unavoidable personal mismatch. So we're missing the profile of Livramento and Hall on down the width for that 4-2-4 attack. We've got Burn there as a result. And because of that, we have to be deeper, more conservative profile, that attacking, that causes the structure to collapse essentially, which means, and what we mean by collapse, Voltemade is left isolated because he doesn't have Hall, he doesn't have Livramento on either side, expand on both flanks, pinning the opponents back, allowing our left wing and right wing forwards to tuck in, whether it's Anthony Alanga, Anthony Gordon, and for them to be next to Voltemade and allow our midfielders to push up as well. As a result of that, so what happens is there's wasted passes. So that goes back to our possession play. The instruction to play direct and high forward passes fails because there's no runners as a result of that, and aren't there, and leading to turnovers and low quality attacks from the opposition, which, even though they're low quality, we've been conceding, right? So is it just tactical stubbornness, the tactical stubbornness of Eddie Howe? So why doesn't Howe adapt, as people have said? Why don't you change the formation, change the players, all these other things? So this is me trying to be empathetic, to see from Eddie Howe's and his team's view, or strategic empathy, as they say. And let me know if this is the case. I'm not saying whether, I don't know if it's true or not, but this is just like seeing it from that point, trying to see it from Eddie Howe's point of view. Let me know if you guys agree and what you do. Why Howe doesn't adapt? Howe is committed to mastering a single demanding philosophy. He believes changing the system now will weaken the ingrained habits and patterns, making the team worse overall. So if you can imagine, for instance, and there is a truth to it. So for instance, you had a team in Newcastle, for instance, a team that is 1 week high pressing, man for man, your Bournemouth style type of team, high pressing, man for man. And the next week you want them to be low block, counter attacking, but hitting them in transitions. That is very, very difficult to kind of master both sides to the nth degree, really. And it can cost you. It's a little bit like, and I've heard Terry Flewers make this example. I don't know if it's this exact example, but I got it when he said it, which is like, for instance, I enjoy running, right? So, but I can tell you guys now, there's a difference between running outside on the street to running on the treadmill in the gym. And even if you can run, for instance, on the treadmill for 2 hours long, when you go out on the street, you're literally you're ready to collapse after 10, 15 minutes because it's different. Your mechanics and your habits and your breathing is different. Same way as if you're running on the street, and if I go on the treadmill right now, so if I'm at the moment I run outside, I can run for an hour and 15, an hour and 20 minutes. I used to run for 2 hours. But if you put me on the treadmill, even at my peak, when I'm running at 2 hours and I've got the weighted jackets now on as well, I'm telling you, you would think I'm lying to you that I say to you I can run with weighted jackets because I'm on this treadmill and after 10 minutes, I'm ready to give up. So there is a truth in and that's because the mechanics of it are different for me in my human body between running outside and being on the treadmill. So I can kind of see what the point is, which is Eddie Howe sees it as we have to master this one blueprint. It's got to be the blueprint because it needs us to achieve what we need to achieve going forward. But we have to master it. If we try to master too many things, or even two different things, right? The habits and patterns that players were getting and ingraining themselves won't be fully absorbed, won't be fully utilized, and that could cost us more than having to master the one. But also in changing the system and things like that, you're asking also for different profile of player. The profile of player that you want, if you're a high pressing man for man team, is different to the profile you want if you want to also be a low block counter-attacking team. For instance, we saw a beautiful example of that. And everybody before this manager came in knew this would happen. Nottingham Forest, under Nuno Espirito, were a classic low block counter-attacking team. They specialized in it, right? That was their thing. Then they got, within overnight, Ange Postecoglou, who we already know is just essentially high line, high press, inverted at fullbacks at the same time, all out attack. And for the profile of players that he had not enough for us to tell you, their injuries went through the roof, right? Because their mechanics and in their bodies themselves weren't able to adapt that quickly to what he was asking them to do. But also they were losing games because the habits that they needed were ingrained in being the counter-attacking low block team, and he was asking them to be a high pressing, high line type of team, right? And what Eddie Howe and going back to Eddie Howe and Forest couldn't manage that, and the results went horribly wrong. And the conclusion for Forest is they sacked Ange Postecoglou after 7 or 8, 9 games, and they've got what now? Sean Dyche, who is the English version of Nuno Espirito Santos. he's low block and counter attacking, so they've gone back to what they know because of the profile of player they've got, right? So I can understand and I can see from that point of view why Howe is committed to mastering a single demanding philosophy. And it's not just him, it's a lot of managers that are doing that at the moment as well. The second point in terms of why Eddie Howe is not changing or hasn't got like that second blueprint plan is the weight. He is holding the line on his core tactics to ensure when his key profile players, Hall, Livramento, Wissa, who are different parts of their injuries back at the moment. Obviously, Hall is already back. He had 20 minutes. I can't remember how much he played against Brentford, but he's expected to start against City. Livramento, I think, probably be on the bench, possibly with Wissa as well against City. So Howe is waiting for those guys to come back and for their return. The team can immediately slot back into the system and achieve the desired output. So imagine Howe changed how the team played before these players returned. And when they returned, they're having to now adapt to the new in the match itself, to adapt to the style of play, to the new style of play, rather than what they were used to before, right? So that's going to add even more time between when we actually see the results on the pitch itself. So Eddie Howe has had to wait to stick with that one philosophy because it made sense in terms of not overloading players with information, having two different systems and different profile players and suffering for the results, but also waiting for the players who fit the profile for his current system that he wants the players to master. Because when those profile of players return, your Livermentals and your Halls, those fullback that he really, really needs, they're gonna slot right back in. And Wissa, who's used to playing for essentially a counter-attacking direct team from Brentford to now a counter-attacking direct team in Newcastle, he's gonna slot right back in as well. So for Howe, it made sense to wait. And the final one is the current consequences. This inflexibility forces players into roles they are not suited for. So there is, and we're talking about Burn here a lot, obviously, there's other players as well. So widening the execution gap. So Burn can't do what Hall does. Hall can't do what Burn does, but Hall suits this current style of play way more than what Burn does. But we're waiting for Hall, and we're willing to having to put Burn through it. He's feeling the burn because he's having to do what you want Hall to do. He's not doing it well, but he's doing it to his limits. And this is leading to the below average attack that we're seeing in the low XG. But I can't think of the phrase I'm thinking of, but I guess what I'm trying to say is Eddie Howe is willing to sacrifice now. He doesn't want to sacrifice the results. It's not his intent to go to Brentford and to West Ham and say, I'm willing to lose this game just to wait for Hall and Livermore to come back. It's not what I'm saying, but the risk he's taken. I guess what I'm trying to say, the ends justify the means. I think that's what I think it is. We're not liking the means right now. We're not liking Burn at left back right now, right? But the bigger picture of having that one system, having that one style of play, and mastering it is more important than having and it's seen as a better benefit than having two systems, three systems, because of the drawbacks that you'll get. Even if you have short-term success, the mid to long term would still be problematic. And you've got players to return in Livermore, Hall, and Wissa. So I think that's the main reason why Eddie Howe is still waiting, is not willing to change his system because the bigger picture is this current style of play with the right profiles will eventually get him the results that he needs. And it will allow him to keep the injuries down, keep players from burnout, allow him to compete on all four fronts, which he's still currently doing. And once those profile of players come back, your Halls, your Wissers, your Livermentos, you'll also see the results coming back. The drawbacks of changing that system, even if you have short-term successes, that players now have two different systems they have to learn and have those habits ingrained in them. Then you've got the players that were injured coming back into that. They then have to learn it as well. And you're risking a lot in terms of how it could affect. It could hurt. It could hurt, and I think it will even more the performances in the pitch for Newcastle United. It's kept us in the Champions League. We're sixth. It's kept us in the League Cup. We're in the quarterfinal. We're hurting very obviously in the Premier League and in the away ends at the moment. But the risk that Howe is taking is saying, I'm willing to risk this because the ends will justify the means. And when those players return for me in mid to late November, we're also going to see hopefully the same performances and the same results in the Premier League, especially away, as we're seeing in the cup competitions as well. So I think that's why Eddie Howe is sticking to his guns at the moment. And just, the profile of play, obviously, why Hall and Livramento are so important, and they're due back in the squad. Obviously, they provide that space, that width, that dynamism, to turn to central possession into dangerous chances against low blocks, addressing the lack of forward runs as well. They're so important in those areas for Newcastle. Johan Wissel provide that pace and attack, and he'll provide that direct runner in behind as well, turning the high volume of passing to genuine goal-scoring opportunities. That's all to come. But Eddie Howe is having to hold on to that ship and to hold it steady. That doesn't excuse, for me, the West Ham performances and the Brentford performances. But the team know, individual players know, that they are underperforming and the results are hurting them. And it knocks the confidence a little bit. But I don't think but this is why I think they're still playing for Eddie Howe. I think they know what Eddie Howe is telling them. I think Eddie Howe is telling them, we're going to stick to the system. It's going to get us over the line as it has previously. We've won League Cups. We've won League Cup, and we've got into the Champions League twice. Trust me, this system is going to get us over the line. There's no point in us learning two systems because it's going to hurt us even more. We've got players to return. We are going to get better. This is going to get better. But we have to stick it out with what we're doing now. It doesn't excuse us being poor in possession. It doesn't excuse us for not being aggressive in certain points in our defending. It doesn't excuse us not showing technical ability in the final third or creating chances or making runs. But this is the system that we're going to stick to, because in the long run, we are going to see the benefits of it, and we're going to see the ends justify the means. Now, there is no, before I go to the chat, I want to say that there is no guarantee to this, right? And I don't think Eddie Howe is saying that there's any guarantee to this. Like, we're all of a sudden going to zoom up the league once Hall and Livramento and Wissel are back. I think we've got a greater chance of doing that, absolutely. But I do understand, and I do see it from that perspective of why it makes sense to still stick with what we have. I think it gives us the better chance, as opposed to having two systems or three systems necessarily. Is there game management that Eddie Howe could have improved on, substituting Dan Burn and things like that? Sure. But I've seen, and you guys have seen, for instance, players like Joe Linton, Bruno pick up early yellow cards and Eddie Howe showed trust in them, and they rewarded them early in games, and they didn't get sent off, for instance. Do you guys remember, was it last season? Bruno was on 9 yellow cards, and he was 1 yellow card away from like a 2-match suspension. And Bruno said to Eddie Howe, and I think it will take another 10 games or so before that whole system will get reset. So he comes back to 0 yellow cards and starts it again. And Bruno said to Howe, trust me, boss, I'm not going to get that yellow card. I'm going to stick it. Just play me. Please play me. And Bruno rewarded him. Eddie Howe showed him trust, which Bruno paid him back for. He didn't get a single yellow card, and that was reset. I think some of those things are playing in Eddie Howe's mind, right? When he's looking at those players and he's showing them trust. Eddie Howe showed trust to Dan Burn to not get that second yellow card, and it didn't work out. Dan Burn will know, Eddie Howe will know. So it's not all one way. So all in all, I do see where Eddie Howe's coming from with this as well. It's a risk in itself, but I think it's the better choice to do. And I think he's explaining this to the owners. The players already be aware of it. I think in a different way, he's sort of telling the fans and not telling the fans at the same time, because obviously opponents are watching as well, but they'll know. I think this is, I back Howe in this. If this is the strategy, I back him to do it. I don't think it's wise at the moment to be changing your systems and everything else before. I think it'll be very telling how the team performs once Wissa, Livramento, and Hall are back. It's gonna even having Hall back, right? Because they're still waiting for Wissa, but even having Hall back, let's see how the team performs as well. I'm gonna go to the chats in a minute. I'm gonna play. I'm gonna. This is, you guys. I know it's for those that watch the show for some time. And this is a clip of me. I hope I'm not turning narcissistic, but the point is, this is a clip of me last year, December the 10th or 11th, when Newcastle. This is after 16 games. And Newcastle lost to Brentford 4-2 and lost the previous game. We were going on a miserable run. And it got to the point where people were asking whether Eddie Howe's job should be taken or not, right? And I gave like a 2-hour presentation and conversation as to why I think Eddie Howe is the man to take Newcastle forward. I'm going to go to it in a moment. I'll read the chats, but I'm going to go back to it. But what's interesting is how similar some of the conversations we had then to what we have now. Again, this is not me saying, oh, now because the situation is similar, this is echoes through time, we're going to now see Newcastle go, because we went on a 9-win game win streak, something like that. I'm not saying that, but it's just, I wanted to kind of go back into that and see what I said about Eddie Howe then, and see what, because it kind of talks about there's a lot of similarities in that conclusion as to what's happening now. But I'll read the chats quickly before I get to that as well and see what you guys are thinking. Are you in agreement with what I'm saying at the moment? Do you disagree? What do you think can be done differently? Would you have the two systems or anything else? All right, so I'll go back to that about trophies in a moment. Mobile Jog, if the owners become fans, you get Chelsea signed Sterling. If the owners become fans, Mobile Jog says you get Chelsea when signed Sterling, Mudryk, etc. When Aston Villa overspent on PSR, caught up with them. Think your owners are even more risk averse than mine at the moment. I don't even think my owners are risk averse, because it took a big risk in terms of we were £70 million over the PSR, and that was intentional risk as well. I think they're just having to move cleverer. Wobojog says, oh no, I missed that one. I missed Aaron, I think. Aaron says, I do think the issue is we are too deep and that the gap appears between our midfielders and defense as we get in to win the ball. If we had Hall and Tino, it would be a 4-4-2 out of possession. It would look a lot more like that, absolutely. Wobojog's final thought on performances. Your best LB and his backup have been out this season so far. Your right back isn't remotely as important when it comes to attack. That explains poor run of games you have so far. As important when it comes to attack. Oh, it turns Trippier. Yeah, I think so too. Aaron says, which would allow us to win the ball up higher on the pitch with a 4-4-2 rather than a 4-5-1 to protect the fullbacks. Yep, absolutely. Adrian says Voltemada needs a partner up top. Wissa will be a great combination. I'd love to see that. Adrian says, Howe's ability to drill lesser players into effective teams is great up to a point, but better players don't need that. I think yes and no. Intelligent players can take on information, can learn, all this other stuff. I get that. I do still think you become a more effective team in a system, no matter how good your individuals are. But I think I know what you mean though, Jog. Vator Games, good to see you, sir. God bless you. Good to see you, Vator. Big up, Vator. Guys, do sign up to his channel. Man City fan, incredible creator as well. Vator says, treadmill, you just need to raise your feet. Running outside, you have to generate the force to move. Exactly. So it's different mechanics, right? So that's why I'm not a fan of plan B system, plan C system. You're asking for different players, profiles, habits. It's difficult to do that, especially with less training time on the field. And you know this about Vator, like your team consistently plays in 4 different competitions every year to a very to almost towards the end of the season. Where's Guardiola getting a chance to put in 2-3 systems in one go? I don't know. Aaron says, to be fair to Trips, Murphy has been very selfish and not used the overlap by Trips in some instances, and has been taking shots outside the box. There's a lot to work on. I do think, I wonder if Murphy does that more if he gets closer to the goal when he plays with Livramento. I think he would do that. Wobojok says, yeah, Tino Hall mission really hit you hard, I guess. It has. Absolutely. Wobojok says, I've had to slander Gordon and your attack. I'd love to slander Gordon and your attack. But I know how important fullbacks are, especially given the drops off in the backups. Honestly. Absolutely there. Adrian says, given Howe's need for fan burns high, can we be confident Hall will get much game time? Yes. 100%. The only time Hall won't get game time is Howe has to look after him even more. These are young players still. Like, look what happened to Miley. Livramento had an ACL. Like, we still have to remember those things, and he has to look after them. And that's why I think we're going to invest. We're seeing a lot of links to Newcastle and fullbacks. Lewis Skelly, Wobojog. Lewis Skelly's been linked to Newcastle. What do you think about that? Murillo was linked to Newcastle. I think Newcastle are going to invest heavy into fullbacks. I was wondering why we're so looking at Murillo, for instance, but now it's making a lot more sense. Right, so let me know, guys, what you think about it. I'm going to play this video of me. And I want to remind you guys of this, what the setting was before I played the video. This was Newcastle. Let me go back to, can you guys see this? So this, no, you can't see it. So the video I'm going to play with you guys of me is in December 10th or 11th, 2024. And I want to remind you guys what the context of this was, because context means everything. So this was 24-25 season, where obviously we eventually finished 5th with 66 points. However, Newcastle were, so the video was, we need to talk. The thumbnail was, it was a live stream, excuse me, it was a thumbnail, we need to talk, because again, understandably so, but people were out there saying, the results weren't in our favor. The team and Eddie Howe were up against it. I want to show you exactly. This was after match week 16. I remember that because it was significant. And it was after the 4-2 defeat to Brentford. Where is it? So we had just... Yeah, so let me zoom in on that. So I did this video on the 10th or 11th of December. Make sure you guys can see that. To remind you of the context. This is match week 16. We just lost to Brentford 4-2. Remember that, guys? Absolutely destroyed in that game. Ironically, Livramento and Hall both played in that game. And I was saying that, because up to that point as well, leading up to that point, we lost 4-2 at Brentford. We drew 3-3 to Liverpool, and Palace won. And this wasn't the Palace that's now Palace. This was the Palace that was second from bottom in the league. This is a very fragile in confidence, very, very vulnerable Palace side. I don't know if you guys remember, we were 1-0 up in that game. We managed to revive Newcastle. We managed to revive Palace and give them that 1-1 draw. And before that, again, a poor West Ham team. Ring any bells? came to St. James's Park and they beat us 2-0, right? And so fans were doing the absolute nut. We were eighth. I can't remember where exactly we were in the league at the time. I remember now. This is where we were in the league. So let me show you guys where we're in the league after game week 16. Can you guys see that? This is game week 16. We lost to Brentford. We drew to Palace, poor Palace. We lost to a poor West Ham team at St. James's Park. Game week 16, this was. We were game week 16. Where were we at the time? Let me show you guys this. We just lost to Brentford and we were 12th in the league behind Brentford. As we are right now, after 16 games. We had one. Where is it? Oh, let me go back. What's going on here? So 16 games, we won 6, we drew 4, we lost 6 games at that point in time. We lost 6 games, guys. That's crazy. Hold on, let me see something, because our goal difference seems crazy as well. So we scored 23 goals and we conceded 21 with a +2 goal difference. And we were 12th in the league after 16 games. So that was the context behind that. And just to add, where were we after game week 11? To match it up to now as well, just to add a little bit more nuance to it. I think we're a bit higher, but we were 8th with 18 points. So we're doing a little bit better. But after game week 16, when I did this video, we were 12th, we lost 6 games, and we were battered by Brentford. We drew to a poor Forest side. We allowed a poor West Ham team to come to St. James's Park, where Arsenal couldn't beat us, where Liverpool couldn't beat us, but we let West Ham beat us, and fans were not having it. People, as they are now, which is fine. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. Questioning where Newcastle were, like, what was our direction? Is Eddie Howe the right man for Newcastle? That was the question. And so I did the show where I talked about Eddie Howe and his management credentials. And we talked about his results. We talked about what he'd achieved in the past. We talked about everything else like that. But I gave a conclusion in this game. And I emphasized the importance of the next 3 games for Eddie Howe, because it was getting to that point where it was getting a bit dangerous for him, because I think the next 3 games were a poor Ipswich side. I said we had to win. If we lose that game, where I don't know what else we can justify it. We beat them 4-0. We're going to talk about the scorelines in a moment. But ironically, after that, we played Brentford. The next 3 games are going to be Brentford again in the League Cup, Ipswich, and Aston Villa. And I was saying we need to get at least something out of this game. But I wanted to show this summary. I wanted to show this this part of the show where it's in conclusion now, because some of the similarities between what we're talking about now and what I was talking about then seem very eerily similar as well. I wanted to get you guys' take on this. All right, so let me get back to playing it. Hopefully, I won't copyright myself.
Because not only is away, but it's also against a side that's lower down the league that we're on paper expected to win against. And those are 2 bad combinations for Eddie Howe so far.
So I'm talking about Leicester. Again, we had poor away form. We're playing against a team that we're supposed to beat, which at the time is a bad combination for Newcastle. So
in a way, playing against a team that you're expected to win. We need to see that Eddie Howe change things and develop things for his team. So I'm Eddie Howe in. I think he's turned it around before, and he can turn it around again. My concern is for how long and how sustainable can he make it? He will have, God willing, Sven Botman coming back, and he'll have
Injuries.
the January transfer window. Maybe Paul Mitchell can pull a rabbit out the hat and bring him some players.
Now, we know he didn't do that. He sold players. But what's interesting is from that conversation that we had, Newcastle next game was against Leicester. We beat them 4-0 away. Thank goodness for that. Brentford at the League Cup, we beat them 3-1. Ipswich, we beat them 4-0. Villa, we beat them 3-0. So that's 4 games. Man United, we beat them 2-0. That is 5 games in a row. And then it was Tottenham, we beat them 2-1 away, 6 games in a row. Arsenal, 2-0, 7 games in a row. Bromley, 3-1, 8 games in a row. And now Wolves, we won 9 games in a row. And after that wasn't too bad either. We're winning more games than we lost, right? I hope that happens again. There's no guarantees. But it's interesting how in that time, again, poor away form, players who were hoping for players to come back from injuries to help us get through the storm, essentially. And there were lots of questions being asked about Howe. I backed Howe then as well, because I thought that he had the credentials to do that. It wasn't out of blind faith. If anybody wants to kind of read it, kind of listen to the show again, went through very in-depth on Eddie Howe. And I'm backing Howe again. And I'm also backing what I think is a strategy, which is to stick with the current system he has, to wait for the players he has to come back from injury, which is Hall, Livramento, and Wissa. And it's not necessarily a crisis that Newcastle are going through. It is turbulence, for instance, for sure. But I back Eddie Howe in his strategy in terms of sticking to what we are at the moment. It's a risk. It's a huge, huge risk, right? But international break has come at a good time for us. Hall is back. I think Livramento and Wissa might both be on the bench against Man City. And I think slowly but surely, I think we will see Newcastle turn things around and things will get better. So, absolutely, when it comes to Eddie Howe versus the media or the criticisms that he gets, which is fair, I understand it. I still back him to turn things around. But you guys have been absolutely phenomenal. Let me see what you guys, if there's anyone saying anything in the chat as well. I think Warburg came back on the Skelly news. Yeah, I saw the Skelly news. I knew international has truly begun. Keep in mind, Calafiori suspected to be injured already. Skelly leaving. What's the next one? Yeri unsettled, unhappy. True. Crazy stuff there. Yoms, big up Yoms. Big up my guy Yoms. God bless you, sir. Big up man like Toon. Big up to you, young man. Good to see you, man. Thank you. And folks, do remember to like, share, and subscribe. So, guys, in conclusion, like I've said, we've talked about in the show what the media versus Eddie Howe. We talked about the media, the likes of Jamie Carragher and Simon Jordan, others. We've done this, what the tactical breakdown from some of the guys I listen to the most around, Antonio Mango and the other half in terms of how Newcastle are playing, the problems with it. We talked about some of the solutions, the players coming back. Then we broke down we took the data about where Newcastle are at in certain stacks, the PPDA, the high pressing, the tilts, defensive lines, and everything else like that, to try and reveal what is the intent of what Eddie Howe is trying to build Newcastle to be, which essentially is to be a team that is strategic in its press, defensively compact in that 4-5-1, intentionally passive or zonal, to be able to know when it's going to have triggered the press and win the ball back, and then be very, very direct and aggressive in its attack. And with the right profile of players, they can execute those attacks a lot better. And I think they set up that system to reduce the injuries, to reduce the likelihood of burnout, and to allow Newcastle to compete on all four fronts, which at the moment they're doing everywhere apart from the Premier League. And I think what he's waiting for is the return of your Whisters, your Halls, and your Livermentos, who are the profile of players to allow the current system to be better than what it is at the moment. And you'll see, and the hope is that it will see, and I expect it to see, an upturn in form. I back Eddie Howe. I understand the strategy in my point of view. For me, I don't think I think mastering the one system he has with the players that are due back makes sense. I don't see I don't see the. I think we lose more by trying to have 2 or 3 different systems, trying to get players to have to. I believe you have to adapt and make changes where you can, and in-game changes as well. I think there's fair criticism in that. But in terms of making like a B plan, C plan for different systems altogether, causes more problems than it is. But I back Eddie Howe in terms of his strategy to wait, to master the system that he has, to wait for the profile players coming back from injury to make that system work even better, to turn around the performances, to turn around the results, and to make that happen. So I certainly back Eddie Howe to kind of make that happen and make the strategy. But you guys have been absolutely incredible. As always, adding all the context, all the substance, all the information. Thank you for all of you guys that have liked, that have shared, that have subscribed, that have engaged, that have been absolutely superb. As always, join me on this show, and for those that have joined, guys, God bless you. And as always, folks, take care and God bless.